In the 1980s, Japan didn't just compete in semiconductors, it dominated them, making about half the world's chips. Then it lost. Today, Japan's most advanced homegrown chips are stuck around 40 nanometers, generations behind the leading edge. So a 4-year-old startup called Rapidus is attempting something most experts call reckless, skipping 20 years of progress and leaping straight to 2 nanometers, the hardest, most advanced chip on Earth, in a brand new fab in the snows of Hokkaido. No company has ever made that jump, and Japan is betting over $16 billion that Rapidus can. So is this a moonshot that revives a fallen giant, or a very expensive way to fail? Let's get into it. First, what Rapidus actually is. It was founded in 2022, backed by 8 of Japan's biggest names: Toyota, Sony, SoftBank, NTT, NEC, Denso, Kioxia, and a major bank, plus the Japanese government, which has now committed over $16 billion. Its fab sites in Chitose, on the northern island of Hokkaido. And here's the audacious part. Rapidus has no history of making advanced chips, so it borrowed the recipe. Its 2-nanometer process comes from IBM, developed in upstate New York, where Rapidus sent more than 150 engineers to train. Its lithography tools come from ASML. Its integration know-how is reinforced by Europe's research center, imec. The pilot line is already running 2-nanometer test wafers, and they're hitting their targets. Mass production is aimed at 2027, so why is everyone calling it reckless? Here's why. In chip making, you don't normally skip nodes. You climb them, one painful generation at a time, because each one teaches you how to survive the next. Japan's domestic industry climbed to about 40 nanometers, and then it stopped. When Rapidus's leaders asked Japan's established chip makers to help chase 2 nanometers, they said no. They couldn't take on cutting-edge logic. So Rapidus is trying to leap from almost nothing to the most advanced node in existence, in a single bound. That's roughly a decade, and several of the hardest generations in history skipped. The only way that's even thinkable is by not inventing it yourself. IBM hands over the 2-nanometer gate-all-around transistor design. ASML supplies the extreme ultraviolet machines, the ones that cost hundreds of millions each, that only a handful of fabs on Earth can even run. imec adds the integration expertise. And those engineers who trained in IBM's New York cleanroom, about 80 have come home to Hokkaido to tune the process. So Rapidus isn't climbing the mountain the way everyone else did. It's trying to get helicoptered straight to the summit and praying it can survive the thin air up there. But there's a smarter idea underneath the audacity, and it's the part most people miss. Rapidus knows it cannot outproduce TSMC. TSMC already makes 2-nanometer chips by the hundreds of thousands for Apple and NVIDIA. Trying to beat it on sheer volume would be suicide. So Rapidus is changing the game. Its pitch is called RUMS, and the core idea is speed. A normal leading-edge fab processes wafers in big batches, and a chip can take up to 120 days to crawl through the line. Rapidus runs a single-wafer system, processing each wafer individually, aiming to cut that to around 50 days, less than half the time. Who actually cares about speed over volume? AI startups and boutique chip designers. The companies that don't need millions of chips, they need their design back fast so they can iterate before the market moves on. Rapidus says it's already in talks with more than 60 of them. So the bet was never to become a bigger TSMC. It's to become the fast, flexible, low-volume foundry that TSMC has no interest in being. That's a real defensible niche, if the chips actually come out working. And here's where it gets fascinating, because Rapidus is only one half of a much bigger story. We recently covered India's first fab, and India made the exact opposite choice. India is starting at mature nodes, 28 nanometers and up, with a Taiwanese partner, deliberately walking before it runs, building packaging and a workforce first. Japan's Rapidus is sprinting straight at the hardest node on the planet. 2 nations, 2 completely opposite bets to break into chip making. But look underneath, and the playbook is identical. Government billions, India's chip mission, Japan's $16 billion commitment. Borrowed technology. India leans on Taiwan's power chip. Japan leans on IBM and imec. The same lithography monopoly, both depend entirely on ASML. And the same force driving all of it. A world that no longer wants every advanced chip made in just one place, Taiwan, and is now paying to spread that capability onto friendly soil. India bets on safety and patience. Japan bets on speed and nerve. Same goal, opposite temperament, and we're about to find out which one actually works. So let's be honest about how this fails, because the risks are enormous. And Rapidus' own chairman named them. First, yield. Making a 2-nanometer chip that actually works reliably at scale is brutally hard even for TSMC, which has decades of practice. Rapidus has none. Test wafers hitting their targets is not the same as a profitable production line. That gap has killed far more experienced companies. Second, and this is the big one, customers. TSMC's 2-nanometer is already shipping, proven, with Apple and NVIDIA in the queue. Why would anyone bet a flagship chip on an unproven startup in Hokkaido? Rapidus' only real answer is speed. Be so much faster that it's worth the risk. If that pitch doesn't land, the fab sits empty. And third, money. Roughly 90% of Rapidus' funding comes from the government because private investors aren't yet convinced it can deliver. That works right up until it doesn't. At some point, real customers have to pay real money, or the whole thing becomes a very expensive monument. Yield, customers, cash. Miss any one of the three, and the moonshot comes straight back down. So here's the verdict. Be clear-eyed. The most likely single outcome is that Rapidus does not dethrone TSMC. Leaping 20 years in one jump on borrowed technology with no manufacturing track record against the best fab the world has ever built. The odds are not kind, but that's the wrong scoreboard. Japan isn't really trying to out TSMC. It's buying something more strategic, the option to make leading-edge chips on its own soil again, plus a genuine niche, fast, low-volume manufacturing that the giants simply ignore. And follow who's betting. IBM doesn't hand its crown jewel 2-nanometer process to just anyone. ASML doesn't ship its most precious machines into a hopeless cause. A government doesn't stake $16 billion on a vanity project. When those players line up, the same way Taiwan's power chip and ASML lined up behind India, it's telling you the world has decided it needs more than one country at the leading edge, and it's willing to pay for the redundancy. Reckless? Honestly, yes. But the alternative, sitting frozen at 40 nanometers while the entire AI era gets built on 2, was a slower, more certain kind of failure. Rapidus is Japan choosing a spectacular gamble over a guaranteed decline. By 2027, we'll know if the bet paid off. If you want the real engineering and geopolitics behind the chip world, who's building what, who's betting on whom, and why it actually matters, this channel takes it apart one piece at a time. No hype, no hot takes, just how the silicon really gets made. And if you haven't seen our video on India's first fab, watch that next. It's the other half of this exact story, the opposite bet to the same problem. Subscribe and stay with it, because the map of who makes the world's chips is being redrawn right now. Thanks for watching.